Well, I'm delighted to introduce you all to Greer Aeschbury. She's with the American Civil Liberties Union. She's Deputy Organizing Director for the ACLU of Ohio, where she works with a statewide volunteer network to advocate for an end to mass incarceration through bail reform, death penalty repeal, and other reforms. The ACLU of Ohio is a member of the Montgomery County Jail Coalition. And you may remember that I have given you little reports about that in the past, about the work they've been doing. But she's been working with that group since 2020 in order to prevent the building of a giant new jail, which is not what we need, but we need, as her bio says, we need to advocate for sensible, humane alternatives to detention. And I know that's at all of your hearts as well. So I asked Greer if she might come and give us an update about what's going on with the Jail Coalition and the other things that that group is working on right now to help improve our criminal justice system. So Greer, it's all yours.
Thank you, Roberta, and thank you for having me. I am very excited to talk about this, and it sounds like this is a group that already knows at least a little bit about what's going on with the jail. If you want to throw in the chat things you know already, that would help me maybe streamline my talk a little bit. I'm planning to give updates about what's going on with the jail and the Jail Coalition, and then also two pieces of legislation in the State House that are relevant to our jail population. So if you have any prior knowledge of what's going on with the jail or just what condition it's in, if you've been in there before and observed anything, feel free to put it in the chat so I kind of know where you're coming from. And feel free to ask me questions throughout this. I have a PowerPoint. I hate doing those because then I can't see all of your faces, but it helps me keep track. So feel free to unmute yourself while I'm talking and jump in and interrupt me. No offense taken at all. Can I have screen sharing ability to share my PowerPoint? And I'll try to keep an eye on the chat. Sometimes I'm not great at talking and looking over there. So again,
you should have it now. See.
Okay, I have it. Yes, perfect. Let me move this. Can you all see it?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, great. So I wanted to give a little bit of context in general about jail and incarceration. And this is one of the main priorities that the ACLU works on. So we've done quite a bit of our own research and have drawn on national research as well. So in Ohio, on any given day, there's about 12,000 people who are held in jail pre-trial. And so that means they're people who have been arrested, but they haven't been convicted of anything. They're legally innocent and they're sitting in jail waiting for their court date. And nationally, 6 out of 10 are there because they can't afford their bail. So they've been arrested and assigned a cash bail that is too expensive for them. And as a result, they have to sit there in jail and wait for their court date. And this is really problematic for many reasons, but I think some of the most shocking is that when people spend time in jail pre-trial before their court date, they're actually more likely to have worse case outcomes. So they're more likely to get convicted, they're more likely to have jail or prison time, and their sentences are longer. And so just the fact of not being able to afford your cash bail and get out makes you more likely to get convicted, which means we have a system that is way too dependent on how much money you have, not on, the facts of your case or what's going on with you individually. There's also extreme racial bias baked into the system. So people of color are more likely to get cash bail in the first place. So they're just more likely across the board to be assigned a cash bail rather than released. and they're more likely to have higher amounts. So again, less likely that they'll be able to afford buying their freedom. So then you have a disproportionate number of people of color who are sitting in jail awaiting for their trials. And then what does that mean? They have worse case outcomes and they end up having more convictions and longer sentences. So it's really this cascading effect when we hold people in jail before they've even been convicted. And then it's also really expensive. We did a study in 2020 in looking at Ohio data and found that we're essentially wasting up to $264 million every year holding people unnecessarily in jail. So hugely expensive to our state and to every individual county that's holding people in jail. So the Jail Coalition came together in March of 2020, right before the shutdown. They had their first meeting, and they came together because they were hearing that the county was contracting with this company called HDR to assess the needs of their jail and put together a plan for a possible new jail. And this was a bunch of different individual people and organizations that came together. I think there were like 100 people at the first meeting. There were LEAD, Building Freedom Ohio, ACLU, PJI, ABLE, bunch of organizations and individuals represented. Those organizations are still involved now. There's new members who have joined since then. But the main reason we all came together was because we were concerned that the county was going to build a giant new jail. Some of the numbers that were thrown out were more than double the size of the current jail and the current population. So the Montgomery County Jail, what does it look like? It looks very different pre-pandemic to now. So before the pandemic, on average, there were 700 to 800 people a day that were in the jail. And the jail's actual bed capacity is 443 people. So obviously you can see that is almost double. It is overcrowded, you know, on any given day. The original building was built in 1965. After the pandemic hit, there was this big concerted effort by public defenders, judges, prosecutors, sheriff to try to release as many people as possible, because jail is a terrible place to be when there's a really contagious, very dangerous illness. It's really easy to spread. And so at the beginning of the pandemic, all of those people worked together and they actually were able to release enough people that they dropped below 500. So they were within reach of the actual bed capacity of the jail. And that's really significant to us because it showed that there are almost half the people in there that don't need to be there. Today, you know, the population started creeping up as we became less vigilant, less concerned about social distancing. There was less of a concerted effort. So today, the population is 599, still pretty substantially lower than it was in those 700 and 800 days, 700, 800 people days before the pandemic. So these numbers are really significant to us because they prove one of the points that we've been saying, that we don't need so many people in jail. We don't need to build a giant new jail because there's a lot of people who actually don't even need to be there in the first place. The jail also, you may have seen this in news reports, the Justice report that came out in 2019, the jail itself is in terrible condition and nobody disputes that. I think the sheriff actually, right at the beginning of this year, did a news segment about how terrible the conditions were. So there's crumbling walls, there's leaks, there's mold. There's also, within the jail, all of the women are housed in the oldest section of the jail, which is in the worst condition. And there's just basic things that they're lacking, like proper sanitary products. There's also about 35% of the people who are in jail are being monitored actively for opioid withdrawal. So that's a huge portion that is needing really significant medical care and attention while they're there. So overall, there's really significant problems with just sort of the jail facility itself and the conditions for people who are in there right now that we're concerned about and many other people are concerned about as well. So the county, I mentioned, you know, this Jail Coalition started because the county got together to think about plans for what to do with the jail. When the Justice Committee released its report in 2019, everyone agreed something's got to be done about this. It's not safe for the people who are in there right now. So the county hired this company, HDR, and has paid them about $800,000 to date to do an assessment and make recommendations about what the county should do. And this is where we've had significant trouble. I think Amelia and Roberta have been part of some of our efforts to get information. So really since 2020, we've been reaching out to the county, trying to find out what is HDR doing? What are you asking them for? What information have you given them? What are you hearing back from them? We had press conferences, emails, phone calls. We held a town hall and invited them to attend, and really got almost no information from the county commissioners. So finally, we went to the county commission meeting on December 14th and just addressed the commissioners right there and said, we want to know what's going on with these plans. We know you've got something that is coming. We just want to know what's in it. And then 2 weeks later, the county released the HDR report, which was dated December 9th. So they probably already had it and knew what was in it when we were there on December 14th at the county commission meeting. So the report itself, which I'll share a link in the chat to the report and the assessment, and you can read through them. They're quite long, so I'm not going to try to summarize them, but I did want to point out kind of one of our big interpretations from them. So first of all, they essentially recommend that the county build a jail that is 800 to 900, a little more than 900 beds, and it would cost over $200 million. And right here, I screenshotted the last page of the report that to us highlights what's lacking in this report. So the first paragraph of the conclusion says that basically the population, the need for jail has been decreasing over the past decade. And they write about that in the report. But for some reason at the end of the paragraph, they determine that there's still a small growth in jail beds that we need, which isn't addressed in the report. So we don't know why they think there's an increased need for jail beds, even though they state that the population has been decreasing. And then at the very end, I think that this really drives the point home. The last paragraph of the whole report is, it should be noted that these projections assume the status quo. And that's our problem with the way this has been approached. You know, I mentioned one of the big things that we saw during the pandemic is that we can significantly reduce the jail population through concerted effort. It was possible to release almost 400 people. And so we saw that as evidence that we probably don't need a giant new jail, and wanted HDR to consider that in their report. But all the information that they used was from 2019 and earlier, and didn't take into account any of the strategies that had been successfully used during the pandemic. Regardless, after the report was released, the county said they can't afford a big new jail, so they're pausing their plans. This was, you know, not a satisfactory answer to us, because the jail is still in a critical condition. Nothing has been done to deal with those problems that were identified in the 2019 Justice Report, and that people are still talking about today. And so we're remaining committed to finding solutions that can decrease the population while improving the conditions for folks there. And we're not accepting the fact that we have to just build a giant new building in order to accomplish our goals and make sure it's safe for everyone. We don't know what the county is going to do at this point. We don't know how long this pause lasts, what that means for the current conditions. And so we're kind of in the dark. And I see Julie asked if HDR does reports for other communities. Glad you asked, because they do. They actually did an assessment for Greene County. And Greene County, so I work with a group of activists there, and that's why I know this. They also recommended a much larger jail. They have a smaller population there of like 200 to 300 in their jail, and they recommended a 500-bed jail. And this group of activists, they wanted to propose a tax levy in order to pay for it. And so this group of activists got together to oppose the levy. And in part of their work, they did a public records request. And they found emails from essentially the sheriff asking HDR to up the numbers, that he just wanted a 500-bed jail. And so he wanted HDR to recommend a 500-bed jail. And so they did. And you can see in the report, they have several other options. And then the last option is a 500-bed jail. Also troubling, this company HDR was found to be spying on activists. There's no evidence of that in Montgomery County, but there is in Greene County and in other counties around the state. They were monitoring their Facebook activity and, essentially trying to oppose groups that were trying to stop the building of a larger jail. They certainly have a financial interest in, continuing to build these bigger facilities. So I can also share some articles about that too, but yeah, they're not exactly a neutral player here either. And I think, so yeah, that's kind of my summary of the Jail Coalition, and I'll talk at the end about ways that you can get involved and next steps here. And if there's other questions, feel free to throw them in the chat and I'll try to take a look at those. But these bail reform bills I wanted to talk about because they're an ACLU priority, but also they would have a significant impact on places like Montgomery County's jail, and they would reduce our jail populations pretty significantly. These two bills are SB 182 in the Senate and HB 315 in the House, and they're identical companion bills. So that means both there's senators and representatives who are trying to get it passed, and they're like, let's both introduce this, and whoever gets it done faster is fine. It's the same bill either way. So in the Senate, it's got two Republican sponsors, including Senator Steve Huffman, who is probably some of your senator, and then Senator McCauley. And then in the House, it has a Republican Senator Hillier and a Democrat Senator or Representative Leland. Very broad bipartisan support, as you can see. They both have several co-sponsors from different parties. And these bills right now have been introduced. There's been sponsor testimony for both of them. And then in the Senate, they had a proponent hearing where people who were in favor of the bill could speak in June. The next step that we're waiting for is an opponent hearing where we'll hear from the people who oppose the bills, and then probably a chance for all testimony for other people to weigh in. We don't know exactly when that will happen. We never know exactly what's going to happen with the legislature, but we've been told that they would like to have another hearing by the end of March. So that is promising for us. So what are these bills? So essentially they would, number one, and very relevant to your jail, reduce our incarcerated population. They change our pretrial system, shift it away from the question of how much money you have to the question of what are the specific facts of your case. And rather than rely on that kind of cash bail valve, they ask, are you a threat to an individual? Are you a flight risk? And those are the two questions that determine your outcome within the system. They obviously save a ton of money because they would reduce the jail population as well. So here's an example of how this bill would work. So right now in our current system on the left-hand side, if you're arrested for drug possession, you are probably automatically given a cash bail amount that is either set by a bond schedule, which is sort of a table that says X crime gets X bail, or you go in front of a judge and they set a cash bail amount. So you would get a cash bail. If you can pay it, you get out and you go home and you wait for your trial. If you can't pay it, you're held in jail until your date. And that's sort of, that's the question. Do you have the money or do you not? In these proposed changes, you would be arrested And then the default would be release on what we call OR, which means own recognizance. So just a promise to return back for your court date, no cash bail. So the default would be most people are released on own recognizance. However, if the judge or the prosecutor is worried that they are a threat to someone or a flight risk, then they can flag them and they can hold them for an additional hearing. And they would have that hearing, and the judge would ask this question: are they a threat? Are they a flight risk? If no, then they would go home, no cash bail. If yes, the judge says, I'm not really sure that it's safe to, just release you, they would look at what conditions they can set that would be the least restrictive, that would still ensure safety and ensure that they show back up to court. So that could be things like a no contact order. You can't contact the alleged victim. You can't go around, their house or any other specific place. You have to show up to work every day. It could be as extreme as like electronic monitor, house arrest, drug testing. There's a whole range of tools that judges can use. The key is that they would have to be the least restrictive possible. So they couldn't just default, I'm going to put an ankle monitor on everyone. They'd actually have to look at the case and say what's going to be the least restrictive that is still going to accomplish the goals of public safety and of coming back to court. And then they'd get to go home and follow those rules. And in a limited number of cases, they would be able to be held without cash bail under what's called preventative detention. So that is a law that already exists under Ohio law for the most serious felonies. Judges have the ability to detain people without cash bail and say, I'm not giving you any option to go home before your court date. But in order to do that, they have to go through essentially a mini trial and really have a significant evidence that shows that they're likely the person that committed this crime, because that's such a serious deprivation of liberty. So these bills, kind of in summary, really flip our system so that it's not, again, it's not hinging on that question of how much money you have, but it's really about what are the individual facts of your case. And something I didn't mention before, but is really important here to that release valve is, besides being more likely to be convicted of a crime, just spending a few days in jail can have really serious impacts on people's lives. They can lose a job, certainly, miss a rent payment and get evicted, lose custody of their kids in some of the worst cases. And so this is really, it's essential to making sure that our criminal legal system still has a semblance of justice. And then on top of that, reconfiguring the question from how much money do you have to are you a threat or are you a flight risk actually centers public safety in a way that our current law doesn't. So we really think it's going to have dramatic impacts on who is held in jail in Ohio and in Montgomery County. So I'm happy to answer questions. There's several different ways you can get involved with both of these things, with the Jail Coalition and the bail reform bills. The Jail Coalition actually has a meeting tomorrow at 6 p.m. where they're going to be providing updates for folks and strategizing about next steps with the county. So I can share information about that. And they're also welcoming new partners. So if you as an organization were interested in being more intimately involved in this work, you can reach out and talk more about doing that. And I see Amelia asked a question. It's my understanding that most people do show up to court. Yep, that's accurate. Places like Washington, D.C. has actually gotten rid of cash bail for decades at this point. I think like 95%. I just looked at the stats today, so I can send it to you, but I think it's 95% of people are released before trial, and they have like 91, 92% show back up for their court date, and even lower percentage that are rearrested for a crime while they're out. So the numbers are really encouraging from places that have been doing this for a really long time. And one of the most effective ways, you know, you cited transportation, but another really effective way to make sure that people show back up to court is court reminders. So it's not that people are out there, you know, committing a bunch of crimes while they're out waiting for their court date. It's they forgot, they didn't have transportation, they had to work and had childcare issues. It's much more benign issues that we all deal with every day. So that is exactly right, Amelia. And these bills, like I said, we're expecting that there might be a hearing this month for the Senate bill. And when that happens, all of you are invited to testify. Anyone is invited to testify and share their opinion about those bills. The more, the better. There's an opportunity to do that with written testimony or going in person to Columbus. When hearings come up, we often have very little notice, maybe a week, oftentimes less, and you have to submit your testimony in writing 24 hours before the hearing. So it's a very short window to get that done. So I always recommend that people, if you think you might want to testify, draft a testimony now and have it ready to go, that maybe you can tweak a little bit before you send in. And we have sample testimony templates. We have directions on how to submit them if you're interested in doing that. And you can also sign up for our ACLU action team, which will put you on our kind of rapid alert. So once we know there's a hearing, we'll be sending out messages to everyone on our list that it's time to get their testimony in, and setting up some support for them as well. And also, you know, if you all are interested in really advocating for this and setting up meetings with your legislators to tell them what you think about the bill, especially, you know, Steve Huffman is one of the primary sponsors. I am happy to help facilitate that. We have groups doing that around the state right now. So happy to help you all if you're interested in doing something like that. And I'll stop share. And yes, I will distribute my PowerPoint, and I can share all of that stuff I mentioned, the HDR report, how to sign up for the testimony, all that good stuff. If there's anything specific that you want to make sure I include, let me know, but I can kind of send it all out afterwards.
Well, thank you so much. Oh, go ahead, Roberta.
Yes, I was trying to unmute myself here. Greer, thank you. That was just such a concise and impressive presentation. It gave us a whole lot of information in just a short time. And, you know, it really is something important to what we're doing. So we're very grateful to you for taking the time to be with us tonight.
Thank you. My pleasure. It's great to be with all of you.
Greer, there's a question. Do you know what Governor DeWine's opinion about the bail reform is?
Yes. Well, no, we don't know for sure. We've heard murmurs that he is supportive. He's certainly not rallying the troops against it. So that's good. It seems like if it got through the legislature, we'd have a good chance of getting his signature. I think as the closer we get to the primary, the less likely it is, because conservatives don't want to be seen as supporting something that could be construed as a crazy liberal conspiracy. So that's also the political reality we deal with.
Okay, I think we're back to you, Amelia.
I'm going to turn it over to James. Close it out or answer further questions or.
Yeah, you know, just listening to everything that she's said and she's doing, it's the experience of it is just crazy. I personally have been inside the county jail, and one thing and Carolyn has too, but you have to understand, being in the county jail is worse than being in prison. You just understand that, yeah, it's worse. There's not much movement. You're all on top of each other. You're sharing. And one day in prison, one day in the county jail is equivalent to 2 days in prison. So imagine that, 6 months to a year. You much rather do a year in prison than do 6 months in the county. You have to, and you know, from a man's point of view, I did get an OR bond, and I did come back. Even when it was time for me to get sentenced, I came back. But you know, there are those that it's dicey, and I'm gonna say this to Greer, it's dicey coming from a returning citizen that, you know, even though you say you don't, it's not a cash thing, but it's still up to the discretion of the judge. The judge still can pick and choose, and there's still backdoor, you know, deals being made. We want to hold this one and let this one go, and it may not have anything to do with money. It may have to deal with who you know. You know, it's never a perfect system, but this is much better because there's so many people who can't go home, and they haven't been convicted of anything, you guys. They just sit there waiting to be convicted. That's devastating. And so, I mean, the numbers are so much more leaning more towards allowing a person the right to go home and go back to work until they are tried and have their day in court, versus holding someone and they lose the job, they lose the family. And then 6 to 8 months later, all the charges are dropped, but now they got to try to put their life back together.
Yeah.
You know, that's it. And the stigmas on them, where you did 8 months in jail. Yeah, but I wasn't found guilty, but you did 8 months in jail. So it's on you. So before we even go, Carolyn, you want to say anything about being in the county jail for a lone student as a lady?
Okay, so actually I was in the workhouse in Franklin County, which is now the second worst county jail in the nation. So right there, that should tell you something. I did 13 months waiting for my trial. Never once in that 13 months did I leave that dorm area. Never once did we clean that dorm area. I mean, I'm not going to go into all of it. Like I just said, it's the second worst in the nation. And there you go. You can just imagine that. We had women sleeping on top of each other, no room, completely overcrowded. It was just the hygiene, the mental health attention, none of that was there for us. I've seen a lot of things in that county. And like James said, you do 6 months in that county, I would have easily done 3 and 4 years in prison rather than sit and do 6 months in that county. And I know when I went back for my judicial to leave, I cringed when they called my name to go back. I mean, sometimes it was worth doing an extra 5 years just not to go back into that county. And that was it. It was horrible. It's a horrible experience. And I don't wish that on anyone. And if we can change that, then let's change it, because something has got to give with it. I mean, we're still human beings. Even though we made a wrong decision, we are still human beings, and we do not deserve that type of treatment. And like James says, at that point in time, we're not even convicted.
Right.
You know, I do know there was a deal made in my case even before I took it to trial. They already knew what the outcome was going to be, even though I went through the 2 weeks of a trial. You know, and it is because of who you are. At that point in time, my father was high in society back then. My mother worked for the sheriff's department. So it was just, you know, I was an example that they made out of me. And it's just, it does happen regardless if you're innocent or not, you have a small part in it, or if you did it all, they're going to do whatever they want to do. So
yeah, my son spent a year in the Hamilton County Jail in Cincinnati, and then no, not a year. He was there for a month. He was in prison, state prison, for a year, and he said the same thing you said, James, that the jail was so much worse than the prison. And the other thought that came to my mind was Roberta and I both did programming in the jail for about 6 years, and then I did programming at the prison for about 3 years till the pandemic. And the levels of anxiety were so extraordinary in the jail as opposed to the prison. And a lot of it was because they didn't know, they hadn't been sentenced yet. They were waiting to see what their outcome was. And when you think about it, that is just, it's so unfair that I mean, you couldn't tell exactly because everybody's wearing the same thing, but you could kind of tell that most of them were quite poor by the kinds of things that they would talk about with us. It's just so grossly unfair, first of all, that somebody has to be in jail while they're still innocent. And secondly, that if you have money, you don't have to be. So I really fully support these efforts, Greer, and I'm so appreciative of you and others. And I hope some of us will get involved and, do the kinds of actions that you're talking about.
Thank you again, Greer. Does anybody else want to ask Greer anything or have any comments towards her before we start closing this out?
Greer, I just want to say thank you also. This is desperately needed. And so thank you.